IEM Katowice 2023 just occurred, and at the end of the tournament, there stood a champion that nobody expected in an incredibly deep field of the best Korean and non-Korean players in the entire world. You had a guy who just changed his ID from Time to Oliveira take the championship down. It was an incredible story that nobody expected, and his run was absolutely phenomenal. He started his group in a little bit of trouble because his group was absolutely incredible. Ragnarok and Dark, two top-tier Korean Zergs that always are a threat in the GSL. Ragnarok, of course, a threat to consistently make round of 8, and Dark has won a GSL. Neeb, the best American Protoss for years and years, a very talented top-end foreigner player. Cure, the very talented Korean Terran. And finally, Clem, the young French phenom who a lot of people have really been looking at as a guy with limitless potential. So Oliveira really had his work cut out for him, and oddly he was only able to win the Terran vs Terrans in his group. He took down Clem 2-0, then Neeb defeated him 0-2. And it was really interesting because nobody thought he really had a chance in a group this difficult. Whenever you look at a group and it has 3 guys who consistently make code S in it, one of them being the best Korean Zerg, being Dark, because Rogue is now in the military, Dark is now the best Korean Zerg. You look at a guy like Dark and Ragnarok as not only some of the best Zergs, but guys from Korea that are truly terrifying. So after he beat Clem and lost to Neeb, he beat Cure 2-0, the Korean Terran. Lost to Neeb again, this time taking a game off of him. And finally, in the final day of the group, he managed to go 0-2 against Ragnarok. Couldn't even get a game, but because Neeb went 0-2 against Dark, he barely advanced from the group, and Oliveira was able to TVT his way through the group. The 12 players that made it out of groups were incredibly talented. The Korean Zerg Solar, who's always a threat. The creative Terran Gumiho, known for his mech style. The top-end foreigner, Cyril, the macro Zerg that everyone is truly terrified of. Beyond, the puppy Terran, the incredibly emotional and micro-based Terran that everybody loves to cheer for. Oliveira, of course, and Hero Marine, the German Terran who's been good for a number of years, has an interesting stream, is well spoken, and has made a few round of 4s in his career. And finally, Dark, the best Korean Zerg, and Creator, an old school player who has come back and made a lot of noise with Macro Protoss. These were the guys that made the round of 12. So this was a very stacked round of 12. This wasn't one of those advancements of groups where you look at the players and say, wow, there were a lot of guys who really deserved to make it out that didn't. Because remember, several players were grandfathered into the quarterfinals. Maru, Ragnarok, Raynor, and Hero. So if you're wondering where some of those names were, they're going to be in the next round. So how did Oliveira do? He dominated Hero Marine in TVT. Hero Marine did take one of the games in a weird base tradey style game. Entering the round of 8, Oliveira was the heavy underdog, facing off against one of the best foreigner players in the entire scene for the last few years now, Raynor, the best Italian pro gamer ever, and an absolute powerhouse of macro Zerg. One of the cool things about this last IEM Katowice was how each of the little player cards had stats as though they were a Madden player. And Raynor had the highest speed out of all the different players, and that was one thing that was asked about quite a bit. And everyone really thought Oliveira was dead 2 games into the best of 5 when Raynor incurred a 2-0 advantage. However, Oliveira came back and he did it with standard, clean, methodical macro play. In the opening game of the series, he went for a BC build that Raynor defended beautifully. And consistently throughout his run, Oliveira showed incredibly clean micro and macro, and he was always diligent about placing depots at his third base to protect against counterattacks. His SCV management was incredible. He had a defense against CJ Hero in the next round against a brutal proxy build that was absolutely phenomenal, and his worker micro was perfect. And throughout this series and throughout this entire tournament run, he really showed clean micro. He did the little things right, placing tanks and sensor towers everywhere. He shows that the sensor tower is still really good after the nerf, and he is so fastidious about making tanks and having them placed everywhere. He doesn't just clump them in one spot. And whenever he makes Hellions, he oftentimes saves them and is able to incorporate a large number of Hellbats in the subsequent part of the games. This is a guy that did all the little things right. He didn't come up with one gimmick build and rip his whole way through a tournament using that one weird build that people hadn't seen. Remember, he's the only representative from China. This is a tournament that had all the best players from all over the world. Korea, of course, heavily represented in this tournament, but you had Special from Mexico, Raynor from Italy, Cyril from Finland. This was a veritable who's who of StarCraft. A Laser from Poland, and you look at this lineup, it even had two of the best American players. So this was a incredible run up until this point, and even though he only won TVT, whenever he was facing off against Raynor and down 2-0, everyone sort of thought, okay, the run is over. There's no chance that Raynor gets reverse swept in this best of 5 in the round of 8. And Oliveira absolutely turned it on and used crisp methodical macro play to nullify Raynor, and he was so good about defending these brutal counterattacks from Raynor that just eat so many Terran players alive. There's creep spread all over the map, and Oliveira, whenever he saw a little opening, he took advantage of it beautifully, and he was so decisive. That was one thing that jumped out to me about his entire tournament run, was how incredibly decisive he was in a lot of spots where it looked very 50-50 on if he ran in at full steam, if he would be able to win or not, but he very rarely made the wrong decision and would often snowball his advantage into cracking his opponent. It was a sensational run, and to reverse sweep Raynor in macro games was absolutely stunning, and that was really the first moment when people stood up and really were blown away by Oliveira in this run, because it had been all Terran versus Terran up until this point. But waiting for him in the next round, the best Korean Protoss, CJ Hero. CJ Hero is one of the best Protoss players of all time. He is a decisive, aggressive Protoss player who is capable of some of the most aggressive and cheesy strategies, but he's also an incredible macro player. This is one of the most scary guys in the sense that he can truly do the range of build orders from 1 to 10, 1 being most cheesy, 10 being most macro focused. And this is a guy who is like the guiding light for Protoss players. This is a player who, when he returned from the military, a lot of Protoss players looked to him to figure out the PvZ matchup. He's a guy that defines the metagame, and he's known as a player who comes up with a lot of really interesting and sharp build orders. He's also a very good best of 5 and best of 7 player because he does have so many build orders and strategies to pull from. This is a guy with a very deep bag of build orders who knows a lot of really interesting tricks. And he's just incredible micro-wise. His micro is truly jaw-dropping and top tier. So whenever Oliveira was set to face off against Hero in a best of 5, people really thought, okay, this is the end of the run. The reverse sweep against Raynor was something, but as CJ Hero we're talking about, GSL finalist, Code S legend, and perennial Protoss stalwart. And what happened? Oliveira beat him in convincing fashion. And the game that jumps out to me is the game where Hero went for a proxy gateway and really tried to get the pressure on early. This is a really creative build that puts pressure on your opponent, and on land whenever all the chips are down and you know everyone's watching, it can be very easy to sort of let the pressure get to you and take more damage to a weird adept rush than you would normally if you were playing at home, but Oliveira controlled his SCVs so beautifully that the rush was completely nullified. And that was one thing that stood out to me, was how clean and efficient Oliveira's micro was. He got everything out of units. He won the little trades whenever it came down to harassing with small amounts of units or microing certain amounts of bio against other players. He was a guy that got every little edge and did all the macro things right. Always made turrets when he needed to, repaired the turrets well against mutas, sensor towers, never was really caught off guard. Hero is a player that makes other players look off guard and always surprised. He's a guy who likes to stay in the driver's seat and hit you with these builds that are so sharp and so well thought out that you've never really seen them before, because oftentimes they are just straight up creations by Hero himself, original build orders that he's debuting at a tournament. So it's so easy to die to a guy who's so creative and can execute these crazy build orders at such a high level. Oliveira looked in control almost the entire series. He was able to hold these crazy aggressive maneuvers. The game with the proxy gate sticks out in my mind as an example of perfect early game execution. But then when Hero did the Colossus timing, man, Oliveira did such an incredible hold that is natural, and then was able to run out with a plethora of bio and push the Colossi back, and Hero sort of knew it was over. And you could tell that he had done that push effectively so many times. And another thing that jumps out at me is the Liberator use from Oliveira was just insane. This was a guy who kept the Liberator harass up constantly. He would Liberator harass a base, and then whenever it would start to be defended, he would simply shift Q the Liberator to another base to harass. The Liberator is so strong and one-shots workers that it's something that you have to address. If you set up Liberator harass while a huge fight is going on and your opponent can't address it, then they simply lose their entire worker line, and you have to micro very little. It's not like setting up a marine drop on shift Q where then you have to stem and micro the marines. It's very easy just to click the Liberator right over their base and then shift Q it to another base. That's one thing Oliveira did beautifully this entire tournament, was he would use Liberator harass, but he wouldn't use it in the same sort of get Liberator range and try to hide them in abusive spots way behind somebody's mineral line style. He would simply click them right over the base for quick, efficient damage. At this point, Oliveira had beaten some of the best Terran players in the world, both foreigner and Korean, reverse swept the best or second best foreigner Zerg in the world, a complete dynamo, a top level macro player who is right up there with Cyril every tournament and is usually the guy knocking Cyril out of the tournament with CVZ. So to be able to reverse sweep Raynor was an absolutely huge deal and was just a catastrophic blow for Raynor. This was a guy who was a heavy favorite to win this tournament. A lot of people were thinking, when we see round of 8, it's looking like a Cyril Raynor finals perhaps, but you see Maru at that other side of the bracket and you really start to look at him, because this is the guy known as the fourth race and a guy that Oliveira would have to face in the finals. And if you look at that semifinal matchup, Ragnarok, Maru, on the other side of the bracket from Oliveira and Hero, if you're a GSL fan, you knew how that one was going to turn out. Maru has been monster moding Ragnarok for years. Ragnarok just can't get one over on Maru. He lost 3-0 this time. If they played a best of 7, he would have gotten swept in that too. Ragnarok just cannot beat Maru. Maru's TVZ is pretty much perfect, and Ragnarok is a guy who plays very well and at the top end, but when it comes to like the top 5 or 6 players in the world, he's just not able to beat them. He's like perennial between probably like the 8th and 20th best player in the world. So when audiences saw Maru waiting in the finals, they thought Oliveira stood absolutely no chance. Maru has won multiple GSLs. He's so insanely talented that his nickname is the fourth race. He plays Terran like nobody else plays Terran, and to play him in a mirror matchup is particularly daunting because you're limited to using the same units as him. It's much harder to get one over on your opponent in a mirror matchup. They have the same tools that you do, and Maru is a master of the marine tank. He can also play turtleneck very well. He's a master of early game cheese defense. He's really good at doing cheese himself, particularly 2 racks for a Zerg he's known for. And Oliveira really had his work cut out for him. And whenever Oliveira went down 0-1, everyone in the chat was spamming, oh, here comes the easy 4-0 for Maru. Okay, here it is. Yeah, the run was cute, but now you get to face Maru, who's a god. Oliveira's done. Okay, yeah, he beat CJ Hero. He reverse swept Raynor. He beat some of the best Terran players in the world, but come on, his luck has finally run out. This is what everybody was thinking before the finals started, and man, after Maru took the first game, everyone was patting themselves on the back saying, okay, here comes Daddy Maru, here comes the best Korean Terran player out there right now, and a top-tier legend who's been terrifying for years, but has really had more success in Korea than he has in these big foreigner tournaments. And of course, you know, winning GSL and winning Kodes is the most prestigious thing. But it would have been a really nice accomplishment for Maru to win this big tournament with the stacked field. So whenever he went up 1-0, man, again, the betting odds were just so against Oliveira, and it was such a long shot for him to win. Just like when he was down 0-2 versus Raynor. This truly was like a Boston Red Sox in the 2004 ALCS type comeback. And whenever Oliveira started to mount this comeback, even whenever he went up 2-1, everyone was sort of saying, well, okay, I mean, that's fine. Maru's still going to come back, like it's no big deal. And the way that he won the subsequent game after going up 2-1 to go up 3-1, that pivotal game 4, reminiscent of the 1993 World Series when the Blue Jays beat the Phillies in that game 4, that game was a bloodbath, and Maru was just completely flummoxed in that one. One thing that stands out to me about Oliveira is his Cyclone use. His Cyclone use is so clean. The way that he uses the lock-on and then micros the Cyclone was always perfect. He was so good about using it to kill money units like tanks and TVT, and also harassment-based strategies. The Cyclone was just brilliantly used by Oliveira, and in this game in particular against Maru, we saw him use the Cyclone brilliantly and do something that he did all tournament, which was backstab his opponent with these little harassment options as they go for an aggressive play. So that was one thing that Oliveira just did so consistently throughout the tournament. Not only was he defending really well, but he would oftentimes have harassment set up on the other side of the map, and he killed it with Liberators. He didn't just do that with this with drops, although he did drop very efficiently throughout the tournament, but the Liberator use was just out of control. He would also use Liberators to control zones. This isn't a guy who just used Liberators to do mineral line harass. The zone control use of Liberators was brilliant as well. There was an engagement at the end of the Maru series where he really used Liberators to box Maru in, and Maru did this brilliant retake of his main, but it was too little too late because Oliveira just macroed brilliantly too. He wasn't like a 3 base and push all-in player. He was going toe-to-toe with Maru in terms of bases and playing these big long-winded macro TVTs that really test your mettle whenever you're playing Maru, who's just so good at taking every little advantage. Brilliant at micro. Maru isn't a guy who's going to get supply blocked or miss production cycles either. It's just so hard to beat someone who plays so brilliantly and at a phenom level in a mirror matchup. This was a crazy, ludicrous run. Probably the biggest ludicrous run in StarCraft 2 history. For Oliveira to be able to go on to defeat one brilliant opponent after another was breathtaking because he wasn't defeating one style of opponent or one race of opponent. He truly ran the gauntlet, facing off against the best players from all over the world, creating insane reverse sweeps, showing great micro and macro, fastidiously placing his depots, not missing production cycles, using beautiful Liberator harass, and doing all the little things right. To me, after watching all of his games, the one thing that stood out to me was how well he did all the little things, how he took every little advantage. He didn't just run through the motions, he saved every little SCV. He never skipped a sensor tower. He was always keeping pressure on his opponent, and when he smelt blood in the water, he truly went for it.